Joining us is a gentleman who has been out there doing quite a lot of work. Let me say a pleasant good evening and welcome to The Observer to Attorney at Law, Mr. Jagdeo Singh.
Good evening, Mikey.
It's a
Good evening to your listeners.
pleasure to have you on, of course. Our viewers are there, and of course, season's greetings to you and your family and your entire
Same
staff.
to you. Many happy returns
Thank
to
you
you
indeed.
and your viewers and listeners.
Thank you. The health minister, of course, made it quite clear that they should have consultations on the registration of drugs in Trinidad and Tobago instead of folks going around saying that the process was being misrepresented. And he's talking about, according to a small drug supplier who wished to remain anonymous for fear of victimization. Now, all of this came about, Mr. Singh, based on the fact that there is a monopoly, especially when it comes to pharmaceutical imports in this country. Some companies have been bought out, smaller companies, well, other companies have taken over, and what have you. What has that done, especially for the suitcase traders and those who are trying to ply their trade when it comes to importing pharmaceuticals?
Well, Mikey, look, this is not an entirely straightforward issue. We're dealing with pharmaceuticals. We're dealing with the fact that the government has a responsibility to the population to ensure that only proper pharmaceuticals enter the market. Okay, having said that, the government also has a responsibility to ensure that there is a wide availability of varied pharmaceuticals which can do the same job, so you have choice. But most importantly, the government has a responsibility to ensure that the supply chain of pharmaceuticals is not so concentrated that one company or a group of companies controlled by one person or one group of persons can act in a manner which is oppressive to the marketplace. You have to remember, Mikey, pharmaceuticals, the largest consumer of pharmaceuticals, is perhaps the most vulnerable sector of society, the old and the infirm. When you look at much needed pharmaceuticals, the issue is not so much, well, not the marketplace. If the supply chain is too concentrated, then that company can set any price it wishes. The markups are oppressive. The control of demand, of supply to demand, can also become oppressive. And most importantly, Mikey, most of these drugs are supplied to the citizenry, a lot of it, by insurance companies which pay for pharmaceuticals, and also the government program known as CDAP. So
Right.
whereas the minister disclosed a few weeks ago to the parliament the amount of monies paid every year under the CDAP program, what the minister did not disclose, and perhaps in all fairness to him, the question didn't cover it. But of the 50-something odd $1 million that has been paid under the CDAP program what are the companies that have received the lion's share of that CDAP money? You see, that statistic is important because it then tells you which companies are supplying the most pharmaceuticals to the government. And there's also a disparity in that, because we are being told that certain companies are getting preferential treatment towards their payment under the CDAP program. But pharmacies which are spread wide and varied geographically throughout Trinidad are having a lot of trouble to get their payments processed. Whether that is true or not, it demands an answer in the public interest. I cannot say whether that is true or not, but the government should release the figures to show where the CDAP money is being spent. And from that statistic, many other things can then begin to become, to be revealed.
All right, so Mr. Singh, what you're saying basically, and I think people understanding here, is a lack of transparency in the entire process, because the health ministry is saying that the process is primarily aimed at protecting the nation's health by ensuring that drugs are approved for sale and consumption.
Of course it is, and that is the duty and responsibility of any responsible government that you cannot allow the pharmaceutical market to be flooded with drugs and fake pharmaceuticals and substandard pharmaceuticals. The issue which people are having is the time which it takes to get these things approved. One, the onerous requirements and sometimes unreasonable and perhaps sometimes even unlawful requirements that are put in place for the approval of certain pharmaceuticals, and the time which it takes. You see, the minister in his said, well, look, we approved so many hundreds of applications. Okay, fine. But who made those applications? Which is the company that received the most amount of approvals? What was the time frame for the approval of some, whereas the time frame for the approval of others? Is there a disparity in the time frames? All those things we need to know. So you see, you can use statistics to paint a picture which is favorable to you. But as we all know, any good student will tell you that, economics student will tell you, that economists oftentimes tell you there are three types of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics.
That's right. That's right. And of course, looking at it, of course, when you start to look at the breakdown, if you are denied for whatever reason, deficiencies as listed, certificate of analysis for each flavor, ingredients, good manufacturing practice. Now take in consideration that many of these pharmaceutical products have been approved by the FDA
and are for sale on a widespread basis in developed countries such as the European Union, the United States, United Kingdom, many of the developed countries in South America, worldwide distribution networks from reputable companies. So what is happening here is that bureaucratic roadblocks are being put in place, and that is why we need to know, and the minister needs to explain, what is there disparity in the time frame between some approvals and other approvals, and are those conditions being imposed on an equitable basis across the board?
Yeah, because I mean, when you look at it, you have to submit everything. And some of the documents, of course, will show if there were any claims laid against this product in the United States or any of the developing countries. You're not seeing that. It's FDA approved, and that means a lot. Then why is it that there's such a bottleneck, there's so much bureaucracy, that it's so difficult for the average person who wants to ply their trade to circumvent all of that? Why? Is it deliberately being done to favor some?
Well, you see, and that's why the statistics are important. Simply to put out figures there to paint a certain picture doesn't tell you the entire picture. You see, those statistics have to be analyzed at a more granular level, Mikey. It's simply not good enough to say, well, okay, we received 1,800 applications between a 3-month period, out of which we approved 800. Okay, fair enough. Which company received the most of those approvals? And are the conditions which you've set out, which you just read, are they applied equitably across the board? Is a company which is importing established pharmaceuticals into Trinidad FDA approved? Is that FDA approval being dispensed with in some and saying, well, look, that's approved in the US, we don't need to do the approval process here in Trinidad anymore? Or are the conditionalities laid down for approval more stringent in Trinidad than they are in the US and the UK and the European Union and Canada and the developed countries of South America and Australia and so on? What about pharmaceuticals coming from India, the pharmacy of the world? Are those pharmaceuticals subject to the same stringent requirements? I beg your pardon, Mikey, and let's look at it. A stark example.
Right.
When the world was going through COVID, and we imported hundreds and thousands of the manufactured in India at the time and developed in very short space of time Pfizer vaccine, or you name it. Were those vaccines subject to an additional approval layer in Trinidad? Similar to the one we find now? Why was it dispensed with then and conditionalities are being posed now? What could be the good reason for that?
Could it be justified by saying that basically it's within the middle of a pandemic?
Well, perhaps it could, okay? But the middle of a pandemic doesn't give you the right to bring substandard vaccines into Trinidad. So
right.
One must assume that the stringent approval process must apply across the board.
Yeah, I mean, again, when you look at the figures, according to the response that the minister gave, responding to the member of parliament from Mayaro, asking how does the ministry intend to address the backlog and delays in the drug registration inspection, he said that as of November 18, 2024, he was advised that all drug registration applications are current as required by the Food and Drugs Act, where the applicant should be notified of the status of the application by 180 days. Now, again, you're right. Throwing out figures doesn't mean anything. We don't know who are the names behind this. When you come down to the fact that he says 126 applications were deferred to applicants requiring additional information. Are these newcomers who are applying? I mean, they must understand the criteria. They must have an idea of what's expected when they submit and ask for these things to be registered. So again, are we seeing a lot of verbal acrobats and numbers being tossed around only, of course, to throw us off?
The statistics need to be analyzed on a far more granular level. Simply to put it out there and rely and hide behind the facade of figures which tries to paint a different picture doesn't really tell you the full picture.
But then one has to ask, is this entire exercise meant to just frustrate those who are trying to get these things approved to finally say, give up, I no longer want to, because it's a headache. I mean, it's compounded with the fact that foreign exchange is difficult. It's a challenge to get Forex. It's a challenge to have it registered. It's a challenge to have it approved. Is it just a matter of having these things implemented to get rid of some of these dealers and those who wish to get involved?
Well, it also has to be looked at a different level, Mikey. There's a different layer. When these pharmaceuticals are sometimes imported into Trinidad, it gets stuck in customs.
Right.
Customs then imposes conditions for release in tandem with the Food and Drug Administration. The Food and Drug, well, I don't want to call it the Food and Drug Administration, Food and Drug Department.
Right.
They then impose additional conditions which sometimes have no basis in law. And then they hold up your goods in customs. The longer it stays there in a warehouse which is ill-suited to store pharmaceuticals, it means you can't market it. By the time you get it, your cost of demurrage, sometimes the pharmaceuticals are simply not fit to put on the marketplace. You can't be competitive.
Now, what happens if you have someone who has applied and has been getting the runaround, but is now seeing that very same product on the local market? Then how did that get approved?
Citizens have rights.
Right.
The Food and Drug Authority is an administrative body and they're subject to public law principles. They're also subject to constitutional principles of protection of the law and equality of treatment. So citizens have rights. Undue delay by a public authority in rendering a decision is unlawful. So people out there who have put in applications which are pending 3 and 4 and 5 years, I am told sometimes, 8 months, 9 months, if this statute tells you that you have to get a decision within 180 days, then you can take them to court.
And wouldn't be, I mean, when you hear from the ministry, it could be that, listen, what you couldn't supply us with, we were given that information by someone else who is your competitor, and that's why perhaps you're seeing the product on the market. I mean, these are some very unfair trade practices that we're seeing here, Mr. Singh? And is there any
Right.
governing body that is in charge to regulate these things so we can have some sort of fairness across the board?
The Fair Trade Commission is vested with wide powers to conduct their own investigation.
Do they have teeth?
Of course they do. They can hold public hearings. They can invite members of the public to come and bring evidence. One of the things we have to look at, Mikey, is drugs, pharmaceuticals which are supplied to the government. We all know the prices in the generic manufacturing centers of the world, of which India is perhaps the biggest. What are the prices which these pharmaceuticals are being supplied to the government at? Or what is the manufacturing cost and the cost to the importer? What is the markup between what it costs to bring into the country, including shipping and freight? I'm not so sure pharmaceuticals have duties. I can't be correct on that, but let's assume there are taxes and duties on it. When you look at the cost per unit of the pharmaceutical that it's imported into Trinidad at, what is the final thing that needs further analysis? Because you see, that can only come about if there's a monopolistic supply chain, Mikey. And that's where the answer is. If there's a monopolistic supply chain, that monopoly can then charge whatever price it wishes, because by the time a new player comes in, gets approval, tries to come to market, you know the difficulties with that. Fairness and the transparency and the levelness of the approval process in the pharmaceutical industry is of critical importance, because pharmaceuticals play a pivotal role in the health of any society.
I agree with you 100%. And to have those, as you mentioned at the early start of this interview, the most vulnerable in society being at the mercy of a monopoly, I mean, that is totally unfair, because at any given time, they would be able to raise the prices and sometimes out of the reach of the common customer.
But when the prices go up beyond the reach of the common customer, you know who pays for it, Mikey? You and I.
Yeah, that's right.
The taxpayers under the CDAP program.
That's right.
The insurance companies pay for it. You know what that results in? It results in higher premiums to the health plans. So every public servant who is part of the government health plan, which pays, I think they pay 80% of the cost of pharmaceuticals supplied for illnesses. When that price goes through the roof, as it may be at some point in time, the insurance companies don't bear the cost of that in a vacuum, Mikey. That is passed down to the consumer in the form of an increase in premium. Because the more claims you have, the more you pay out, the less profitable the plan is. So it's not attractive for the insurance companies to enter into these plans. So what you have is a commensurate increase in the premium. Which, by the way, the government pays, and the public servant pays part of it. So inevitably the taxpayer pays twice.
Which is totally unfair. And again, you know,
it is.
I mean, you have to feel it for the senior citizens, especially who are already on a fixed income and simply trying their best to keep their head above water, now having to be at the mercy of a system that seems to have just bolted out of the stable, and we're trying to play catch up. I mean, and this is bad. This is totally bad.
There has to be a level of transparency and fairness in this process, Mikey. That's all I am clamoring for.
I
don't intend to cast any aspersion on anyone or the minister or any politician or anything like that. What I'm clamoring for is a measure of transparency and fairness in the process, and ultimately it benefits the consumer. The consumer is that most vulnerable sector of society. The old and the infirm.
And I echo those sentiments. I really hope that, and I'm good to know that you're championing this cause, because really and truly, when you talk to some of the people who have to rely on these pharmaceutical products and they tell you, listen, all of my pay, all of the little money that I have to make sure that I have to keep my health, sustain something, and I mean, they're trying their best. Now, before you go, I want to also touch on the fact that you said something that really and truly stood out with many of us here in this country. And you said that electronic bracelets, I'm just shifting gears a bit to crime, electronic bracelets is the simplest solution to reduce crime. And now, this coming from an attorney, I tell you something, many of us in society have this perception that when it comes to the whole justice system, lawyers will never talk about implementing something that will put a dent in crime, because we believe it's a cycle that puts money in people's pocket. Look, I've committed a crime, I'm on bail, I have to get money to pay my lawyer, I'm going to commit another crime. But you stood out here and you made it quite clear that if you want to see almost an overnight drop in crime, is to put electronic monitoring bracelets on all those charged with an offense and on bail. I mean, as simplistic as it is, why is it still a challenge for the administration?
I don't know, but what I also suggested, Mikey, is every prisoner who is released from prison having the benefit of the 1/3 reduction should be made to wear that electronic bracelet during the period of that 1/3 reduction. Because the statistics show a lot of violent crime and a lot of crime is committed by persons who are on bail whilst awaiting trial for other offenses. Okay, so first of all, and that was the reason why successive governments have gone to the parliament to restrict the right to bail. The notorious bail acts, we all know that, and the sunset clause and the political brouhaha that emanated from that. Okay, so the assumption is a valid assumption. But there's also another statistical assumption that persons who are released from prison are more likely to reoffend within 6 months of being released from prison.
Yeah.
So if you monitor those prisoners
right.
for the rest of their 1/3 reduction as well, so you plug the hole at the bail stage, you plug the hole at the release stage. I am willing to take a safe bet that no one who is wearing an electronic ankle monitoring bracelet will go out and commit any crime whilst wearing that bracelet. You have to be either brave, supremely brave, or supremely stupid to do that.
And I think, again, so simplistic, but yet still, it doesn't seem to resonate with those in authority to implement. I mean, we are talking about over 600 murders. And we still have a few days ago before we usher in a brand new year. So unfortunately, we may cross that 600 mark. And what we're going to look forward to next year, when you look at all of these things taking place. And you said that society cannot be fixed if people are walking around undetected, so police must be equipped. And of course, there are those who are going to chime in and say, well, you know, the fact that Big Brother is watching and it's an invasion of privacy, an invasion of rights, and all of these things.
Let me put that invasion of privacy down to rest. If you commit a crime, your conditions of bail, you are released on condition by the court, so you're under the supervision of the court. Okay, Mikey, that's what bail is. You are given permission by the court to be released, but the court has the power to impose conditions on that release. So your right to privacy in that sense is subject to the supervisory jurisdiction of the court. So there's no absolute right to privacy, and I said so in the program when I spoke. Yes, we all have rights, but no right is absolute. All rights are qualified rights and subject to reasonable incursion.
Yeah. Again, so simple, it makes sense. And you said that no one wakes up and commits a series of murders for the first time in his life.
No. We all know that there are gradations in crime. People start off at very small levels and then they graduate. So what you do by putting the electronic monitoring bracelets and you monitor these people, you disrupt the gangs.
Yeah,
You
because,
monitor their whereabouts, you monitor their movement, you are able, they have to report in, and if they breach the conditions of their bail, the bail is revoked. They go back to prison. It's as simple as that. These are drastic times, Mikey. We can't hide behind the fig leaf of a civilized society and pretend, well, we have absolute rights. No, these are drastic times, and drastic times call for drastic measures.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. Again, so simple, but yet still so challenging. And it makes you wonder if those in authority even have the will to even make this a priority. 600 murders. I mean,
that's essentially a policy decision, you know, Mikey. This is, the legislation is there, and it's essentially a policy decision.
Yeah.
So you have to have the will to implement a policy decision.
Yeah, but you have the numbers, which is 600 plus murders. I mean,
Yes.
how much of that, how much more would you need to motivate you, to engineer you, to be driven, to say, listen, let's do something, let's do anything. The fact that we can actually identify the movement of people who are most likely to commit crimes. And again, so simple as it is, why is it that such a policy cannot be implemented and best of all, benefit the citizens of this country?
I don't have the answer to that. I'm not a policy maker.
And these are the things that we ask on a daily basis, Mr. Singh. I think we are now to the point, I keep saying that the morning we wake up and hear that there have been no murders, then we're shocked. But when we hear 2 and 3, we say, how come not 5 or 6? These things are so simple, and it doesn't require you having a party card or being affiliated with some political organization. It has to do with what is best for the citizens of this country. That you can identify troublemakers, you can monitor them, you can get to them, rehabilitate them, and let them out again, and of course be a part of a productive society.
Mikey, this is not a political issue so much as a collective socio-economic issue for the collective society to make a decision on, you know. You have to make a decision as a society. What do you want? Do you want to take a decision? Do you want policymakers who will bite the bullet, so to speak, and take the hard decisions? And that's the question that stares the public in the eye.
Yeah, you're right.
Essentially, it's a question of finding the right set of policymakers.
Yeah. I want to thank you so much again for joining. Any closing comments? Go right ahead.
No, not really. I think I've spoken too much already on this issue. But it's an issue that I feel very strongly about, and I think it's a simple solution, but I think it can be a very effective solution.
I agree with you 100%. Again, I want to thank you so much for taking time out to give us an insightful perspective. Keep up the good work. Continue championing these great causes for the benefit of the people of this country. And again, I wish you all the best for the coming year, and we will be speaking periodically.
Same to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.